Hello, and welcome to this edition of Inside Judicial Watch. I'm your host, Jerry Dunleavy, and today we're going to be discussing Judicial Watch's latest efforts to uncover the abuses surrounding the Trump-Russia investigation. As has been well established at this point, the so-called Trump Dossier, authored by Christopher Steele, was funded, at least in large part, by the Clinton campaign and the DNC through the opposition research firm Fusion GPS, founded by Glenn Simpson. Judicial Watch's latest lawsuit, directed at the Department of Justice, focuses specifically on information surrounding Bruce Ohr, a top Justice Department official, and his wife Nellie Ohr, a Fusion GPS employee, as Judicial Watch attempts to uncover the role that they played in this saga. And joining me today to lend her insights is Ramona Cotca, a senior attorney here at Judicial Watch, who helped file these very important lawsuits. So thank you very much for joining me today, Ramona.
Sure, thanks for having me, Jerry.
I appreciate you being here. So before we dive into our lawsuits, and they're very important, I want to give our viewers a little bit of context surrounding this. So as far as I can tell, it feels like there's maybe four main players surrounding the issues that our lawsuit pertains to. Christopher Steele, the author of the Dossier.
Right.
Glenn Simpson, the founder of Fusion GPS, and then Bruce Ohr, Department of Justice official, and Nellie Ohr, a Fusion GPS employee. So are you able to just a little bit, maybe just kind of tie these four people together and explain to our viewers just a bit about why these people matter?
Sure. So you have, like you say, you have Christopher Steele, who's the author of the Dossier, right? And then you have the government, and you have the Department of Justice, who's investigating individuals based on information that was provided from the Dossier in the FBI's request for warrants in the FISA court for Carter Page, let's say, right? That's right. What the Dossier really pertains to, the warrant requested by the FBI for Carter Page. Information in the Dossier that has finally been revealed is the research that Christopher Steele was hired to do, by whom he was hired to do it, and then how that information got to the government, to the FBI, and what the FBI's disclosure was to the courts when it applied for the warrant from the FISA court. So you have Christopher Steele, who is hired by Fusion GPS to do research, opposition research on Donald Trump and Donald Trump's associates. The relationship between the FBI and the company that retained Christopher Steele is key in these cases that we have. You have Bruce Ohr, who's contacted by Christopher Steele to pass on the information to the FBI, and that individual, his spouse, Nellie Ohr, is one of the few employees of Fusion GPS. The key information here, the relevant information material here is that when the FBI appealed to the FISA court for the warrants, none of this information was revealed to the courts. It wasn't revealed that who paid Fusion GPS to pay Christopher Steele was the DNC and the Clinton campaign. That was not disclosed, but also the relationship and how the information came to the FBI was also not revealed to the court. The fact that it went through a conduit and you have a conflict of interest. You have Fusion GPS, who's doing opposition research on a political opponent, passing it on to the FBI, but not releasing information. And then that person from the FBI passes it on further, but there's no disclosure, or we don't know if there was a disclosure with respect to the relationship between Bruce Ohr, Nellie Ohr, who's working at Fusion GPS. If all that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, so it is a big web to kind of untangle, which is why Judicial Watch is doing what we're doing. So to kind of lay it all out, Christopher Steele is hired by Fusion GPS to do opposition research. Fusion GPS, founded by Glenn Simpson. Christopher Steele conducts this research, compiles it in a dossier, and then tries to get the dossier into the hands of the FBI in a variety of ways. Now,
correct, and I was just going to say, let's not forget that Christopher Steele, what we know is he was a source for the FBI, but this actually, the FBI no longer used him as a source because it's been found that he was leaking to the media. So he's actually passing along information to the FBI, to Bruce Ohr, when the FBI has cut him off as a source.
Right, so that's pretty...
And the timing is very, very significant.
Yeah, the timing is key, because the dossier that Christopher Steele put together, as far as we can tell, based on the memos that have been released by the House Intelligence Committee, the information that's been released by the Senate, the dossier sort of formed a major, if not a main part of the FISA applications to surveil Trump associates. And what you're alluding to is the fact that Christopher Steele was let go by the FBI because of leaking to the media.
Right.
And here's where Bruce Ohr comes in a major way, is that even after Christopher Steele was let go by the FBI, something that they didn't reveal to the FISA court.
Correct.
Christopher Steele maintained a relationship with Bruce Ohr, a high-ranking member of DOJ.
And let's back up. So just so the public and the audience knows, Bruce Ohr was the Assistant Attorney General. So when we're just saying high-level DOJ official, that's pretty high-level DOJ official.
Right. He was I believe the number 4 in the entire Department of Justice. His office right down the hall, or maybe even right next door to Sally Yates.
Right.
So he did play a major role, and as you were alluding to, even after Christopher Steele's relationship with the FBI was supposedly severed, he was maintaining a relationship with the number 4 at the Department of Justice.
Right.
So other interesting things to keep in mind: Nellie Ohr, Bruce Ohr's wife. What's the relevance there, and why she's also playing a part in this in our eyes?
Well, the relevance is that her firm, a small firm, Fusion GPS, under a dozen employees, I believe, hired by the DNC Clinton campaign to do this opposition research, and it is her firm's research that is passed on to her husband, who's working at the DOJ.
Right.
And he receives this information supposedly from a former source of the FBI, and that somehow is passed along to the individuals who are actually applying for the FISA warrant. Who and how, what connection and how that was passed along, I don't know if that's necessarily been clear, but how, and the fact that none of that was revealed to the court, and at a minimum, we don't have information that has been revealed to the court. And we have actually contrary information saying that it hasn't. We have definitive information saying, I believe from Devin Nunes' memo, that the information was not revealed to the FISA court.
Right.
That's what's significant about all of this. And it's step-by-step trailing back. Who financed it? What was the scope and what was the purpose of all of this? Now, with respect to our lawsuits that we have and the relevance, really, the reason we have the litigations that we do is to get more information, is to obtain more information to really understand what the connection of all of this is. So right now it's a puzzle. Right now we see the dots connecting a little bit. It raises a lot of questions. And that is the reason that we had filed the lawsuit, so we can obtain more information and see if we can understand even further with respect to what was really going on.
Right, because as it stands right now, we know a bit about the relationship that Bruce Ohr and Steele had. We know that, I believe that Bruce Ohr, it was said something to the effect of Christopher Steele was desperate that Donald Trump not be elected. He was passionate about him not being president, and that sort of thing. And a lot of this happening after the FBI had already severed its relationship with him. So we kind of, like you said, there's a lot of dots, but they need to be connected. And so far, not enough information has really been given out to connect those dots. So let's talk a bit about our lawsuit specifically. What we are trying to get, sort of the tact that we're taking to try to get some answers on this. So we have 2 lawsuits, and would you be able to kind of walk us through what those lawsuits are and what we're trying to get, sort of what pieces we're trying to put together here?
Sure. So we have 2 lawsuits. There are Freedom of Information Act lawsuits, which basically the Freedom of Information Act is a federal statute by which members of the public and organizations like Judicial Watch can make formal requests of federal agencies to obtain information about a specific topic. And so, and the underlying purpose of Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, is so that the public knows what its government officials are up to and what its government is doing. So that's the premise, that's the statute, if you will, with respect to what our lawsuits are based on. And we have 2 requests in regards to this issue that we've been talking about. One pertains to Bruce Ohr and one pertains to Nellie Ohr. Let's take it piece by piece.
Yeah.
So the FOIA request that we submitted for Bruce Ohr, it seeks all records of communications. That means letters, emails, but also text messages between Bruce Ohr and anybody within Fusion GPS, and then also between him and Christopher Steele. And the date of the lawsuit, so we're seeking all records from January 1st, 2015, I believe, to the present. And we had submitted the FOIA requests, I believe, sometime in late January or February, so the cutoff point would be January, let's say, of 2018. So I think the time frame covers the pertinent time frame that we're talking about.
Right.
So one part of the request is for communication records. The other part is for his calendar entries and meetings to see who he was meeting with. And then the third component of the request is for any travel requests. Did he go and meet with Christopher Steele at some point during this time frame? So we're trying to cover all of our bases in the request that we saw for records that relate and pertain to Bruce Ohr.
Gotcha. So we have right now we sort of have a sketch about what he was doing and who he was meeting with. We know that he had met with Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS. We know that Bruce Ohr met with Christopher Steele. I believe that it was revealed that he's also had a number of different meetings and interviews with the FBI as well in 2016 and 2017. And so it's sort of our hope that we're able to really start to fill in the blanks about what those meetings were, what these communications were, and that sort of thing. And you think that it's possible that the calendar and travel could help answer some questions as well?
Right, yeah.
So, and then let's talk about also our second lawsuut.
Yes.
It's focused more on Nellie Ohr as well, and if you can walk us through that and kind of explain why this piece of the puzzle needs to be understood as well.
Sure. So the reason that we did the second lawsuit is really just to focus in on communications between the DOJ, the Attorney General's office. Actually, we narrowed our request to communications between the Attorney General's office and Nellie Ohr or anybody, any employees or independent contractors of Fusion GPS and the company to see what the relationship is. When were they communicating? When was information being passed from Fusion GPS to the DOJ and the Attorney General's office? And I think that will reveal more with respect to the amount of involvement that Fusion GPS had in all of this.
Gotcha. So, and that's actually very helpful. So when we file these two lawsuits, what happens next? I mean,
Sure.
I know that we've had success in some areas of trying to get to the bottom of things in the sort of the Trump-Russia investigation. In other areas, we've been, completely stonewalled by the government, by DOJ, and by these different agencies. What's sort of the next step? What do the next step or steps look like for us?
Sure. So we had made the request to the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice did not. They acknowledged the request, but that was it. So then we filed our lawsuits, the two lawsuits. The Department of Justice, their answers. It's what is called a response to a complaint, a formal complaint. Their answers are due April 11th. In both of these cases. And what's significant about that, once the answers are due, you are already in the court system, and usually the next steps would be that the court, the judge in whichever case you have, will issue an order with respect to a production and a schedule for how the case should proceed. And why I say production is because, especially in a FOIA case, obviously the relevant issues are: has the agency received a request, which is indeed it has in this case, conducted a search, which we do not know whether it has begun to conduct a search or even if it has done one at all, and then production of the records. So once we have their answers that are filed, we should be getting a scheduling order set by the court, and the parties will discuss a schedule for when should the search be completed by, when should the production be completed by.
Gotcha. Now, in other instances like this, I know that you have a lot of experience in trying to get records, trying to get communications. I know that you were involved in a lot of these different cases, the IRS cases and that sort of thing. I mean, can you walk us through just a couple of your past cases in brief, just to let us know sort of the roadblocks that you've run into? And then I'd like to touch on sort of the other cases that we have ongoing about the Trump-Russia investigation and what level of success we're having there. But
Sure. The roadblocks usually will be, we will require half a year to just search. So the agency, whichever agency may be, oftentimes may just want to prolong and, kick the can down the road with respect to when they're going to complete the search and when will they actually have to start producing records. Sometimes we agree that if it's a broader search or a broader request, then okay, 2 months may be reasonable, 3 months may be reasonable. Sometimes we don't. And so then that's when we go to the court. And that's the reason that it's good that we are in litigation, because if the parties cannot agree, which obviously we can't since we had to resort to coming to court,
right.
The court will order and the judge will order a set production schedule, a set time frame, and a schedule for when the records need to be searched by. Once the search is complete, maybe let's say a month or two, but it varies widely depending on the requests that we're talking about. Then you have productions. Now again, depending on how voluminous the records are that we're asking for, sometimes it can be, we'll give you all the records within a month. Sometimes they'll tell us they don't have any records. It's doubtful, I'm very doubtful that they will have no records in this case, especially since we know from Noon's memo that the FBI interviewed and spoke with Ohr, and that Ohr met with Christopher Steele, and part of the request are communications between Bruce Ohr and Christopher Steele. So I find it very doubtful that there will be no records in this case. And the big roadblock after that will be under FOIA, the public has a right to know, but the government does have certain exceptions or interest in protecting certain information depending on certain exemptions, what we call exemptions. And a lot of the times there will be material that the government will say we are entitled to withhold this information under a deliberative process, let's say exemption, or because the information is classified. So that will be the next roadblock.
Right.
And sometimes, those withholdings are appropriate, and that's fine. And we're not asking for anything that pertains to national security that is indeed intended, for the public, not to have, because it needs to be under seal, or it needs to be protected for national security purposes. But oftentimes, the government and the agencies may over-redact information and withhold information more than what it really should hold based on these exemptions.
And we're running into an an interesting way with one of our cases, and you and I had been talking about this previously. We're trying to get information about the dossier itself, and the relationship between the FBI and Christopher Steele, any communications, payments, that sort of thing. And the government is essentially not even acknowledging that the dossier
so
exists.
we have a FOIA request, and we have litigation that we filed requesting for a copy of the dossier, which the dossier has been made available to the public on the World Wide Web, I believe. Readily available. It has been talked about by high government officials and acknowledged, I believe even by President Trump, that the dossier exists. But there is such thing called a GLOMAR response, and GLOMAR basically just means that the government is going to take the position that we cannot verify nor can we deny that the information you're requesting exists. And that can happen in, let's say, if there's a pending investigation. And so if there's a pending investigation in some criminal act or, some activities, let's say, the government can't deny or admit whether they're investigating this, because they're afraid then that the individuals that they're investigating may run away, destroy evidence, etc. So it can make sense at times for having a GLOMAR response. At this point, we all know the dossier exists. We've all seen it. It's available to the public. The President of the United States, I believe, has admitted to it, or at a minimum, I'm pretty sure White House officials have admitted to the dossier. So the fact that the government is taking that position seems a little nonsensical to me, considering that what I would view that as an admission by the government itself that the document and the information we're seeking exists. So we have run into a lot of roadblocks relating to the Russian, the election investigation.
Yeah, because we're also running into roadblocks with trying to get information about the so-called Comey memos and trying to get information about Peter Strzok, Lisa Page's texts, Andrew McCabe's texts. So we're fighting for all of this, but the government in various ways tries to block us. But you think that in this case, with communications involving a Department of Justice official and outside organizations and outside persons like Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele, you think that there's a very good case to be made?
I think so. I think so. I mean, I think the requests are narrow enough in scope. They're well defined, and I can't predict what the Department of Justice is going to do in our cases, but they may try to delay it. They may just be very forthcoming and say, we've completed our search, here are the records. Hopefully they do that, as they're obligated under the law to conduct a search and let us know what its final determination is. Are they going to produce them? Are they going to withhold them? And if they do withhold them, under what exemption?
Yeah.
That's what FOIA obligates the agencies to do.
And Judicial Watch, we were able to play a unique role because there is, there was a House intelligence investigation into this. There's a Senate investigation, but Judicial Watch we actually are going to court. We're getting court orders and that sort of thing. Sort of a unique role that we're able to play.
Right.
Because we have attorneys, great attorneys like yourself, actually going in there and, winning cases, getting orders, getting production orders, and actually getting these documents.
Right. I mean, the basis for withholding information under FOIA has to be based in the law, and you have, and we are in federal district court, and it's up to the judges to determine, to interpret the law, and it's much harder to just ignore our requests once you're in the litigation phase, once you're in a federal district court and you have court orders ordering an agency to do something, ordering an agency to conduct the search, to tell the court when will it start producing records, how many records are responsive to our request, when will all the records be produced, and then what's the basis for withholding the information, and there has to be sound legal basis for withholding that information. So I think that is why I think Judicial Watch is successful in obtaining the information, and then once we receive it, we put it out to the public.
Right.
This is the difference between what we do, and then a lot of times, for example, in the IRS, there were congressional investigations that were being conducted. Not necessarily all that information was getting to the public with respect to the documents that Congress had.
Right.
And in that particular instance, I think we were more successful because we were getting records that certain committees were not receiving when they made the request to the IRS.
Right, and we're still, IRS documents. We're still getting.
We are still getting records.
We're still getting records.
We're still getting
about
records in the
IRS
IRS
abuses. We're
Yes.
still getting Hillary Clinton emails and that sort of thing.
Yes, that's still coming through.
But this is what we do though. We go to court, we win, we get records, and like you said, we make sure that they go out, because sometimes Congress will get something and sit on it.
They'll sit on it. They whatever the reason may be.
Yeah.
But what we will always do is we do disseminate it to the public, and then it's up to the public to make the decisions with respect to who and how they see fit with respect to what the government is doing.
Yeah. So I think it's a fascinating case. I think it's a very important piece of understanding how this all happened. The role that Fusion GPS played, being paid by the DNC, a Democratic nominee, to get opposition research on the Republican nominee.
Right.
Having the Department of Justice, a member of the Department of Justice, meeting with Christopher Steele, who was hired by Fusion GPS, having that Department of Justice's wife working at Fusion GPS at the same time. And these meetings are, it's all very interesting. There's a lot there, but we're just trying to fill in the pieces that we can know, the sketch, so we can really fill it in and see exactly, what level of abuse really happened here and that sort of thing. So I'm definitely going to have to bring you back on as the case moves forward, and as we learn more, and as we hopefully start to get productions and start to fill in the picture, put the pieces together. So thank you very much for being on today.
Sure, it's my pleasure.
It's very enlightening, and thank you for joining us today. Be sure to continue to follow all of Ramona's great work, all of our other attorneys' great work, all of Judicial Watch's great work. Follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram. Follow us at judicialwatch.org. Thank you for being with us today. Until next time, I'm the host of Inside Judicial Watch, Jerry Dunleavy. Have a good day.